Welcome to the Sooners 360 Recruiting Podcast, a podcast for OU recruiting fans by Sooners 360. Each week we catch you up on the latest in OU recruiting news and provide opinions and evaluations on all things OU football recruiting. I'm Chris Mason, lead recruiting analyst for Sooners 360. This podcast is now sponsored by Sooners 360 on Patreon. To support this podcast, please go to patreon.com/Sooners360817 and click subscribe. It's only $2 a month. There's also a free trial option, and I'm posting all of my regular recruiting content there. That link will also be in the show notes. Also, this podcast is now part of the Believe podcast family. Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is episode 96. Football finally starts. So before we get to the football stuff, we'll start with the recruiting stuff since this is a recruiting podcast. So really, obviously, OU got the massive commitment last week from Michael Fasusi. That's still sort of reverberating around the Sooner recruiting world. Huge pickup. If you missed last week's episode, please catch up on that. Along with my guest co-host, Caleb Cummings, we go all over everything Michael Fasusi in terms of that. So we'll jump ahead to the 2025 recruiting news that's currently still out there. The first thing is Andrew Babalola is still in play. Michael Fasusi's commitment has not stopped OU's push to get Andrew Babalola. Michael seems to know Andrew. I think, OU's made a big push since the Fasusi commitment, pushing the same things that I think, got Michael to commit, sending that message to Andrew, development. Bill Biedenbaugh, NFL contracts, first-round pick, go to OU, and for Andrew Babalola, obviously the Creed Humphrey signing news that was all over his local media doesn't hurt. So it's a little all over the place in terms of where people think he is. I think he's getting, I would imagine he's probably getting closer to a decision. That seems to be the buzz flowing around the internet industry. Now, other than Michigan is probably going to be a final choice, who's in play after Michigan is kind of all over the place. All I can say is that my sources tell me that OU is heavily involved with Babalola, still talking to him, still very much engaged. Bill is very engaged with him, and OU is not really worried about, having 3 tackles in the class. That's what they would ideally love to have. And, they'll worry about, there's only 2 tackle spots. They'll worry about that later. So we'll see if it pans out. Like I said, usually when one team is in everyone's predictions somewhere, that usually, the common denominator usually wins out. What I will say here, though, is if you're looking for a reason for some hopium, maybe some hopium I'm spreading here, hitting the hopium canister, what OU has over anybody else in this recruiting battle is duration and distance. So obviously, by the way, Babalola's family has some family connections in Michigan. So that helps Michigan's cause and probably diffuses the distance advantage OU has over Michigan a little bit. But Bill's been recruiting him longer. He's probably had the longest relationship with Bill. And Michigan's got some, obviously, DeMarco Murray got pinched by the NCAA today. And if DeMarco Murray's getting pinched for the ticky-tacky crap that they got him for, which OU compliance turned in, which is, have your own debate about that. But if they're going after that ticky-tacky crap for DeMarco, and they also went after Kirk Ferentz with some very similar minor kind of stuff as well, I think Sharon Moore and Michigan have some problems. So I don't know that OU would be throwing any shade about that because obviously, Brent and Bob have a lot of respect for Sharon Moore. Sharon Moore's a Sooner. They're not throwing a Sooner under the bus. However, Hugh Freeze definitely will. I could see Stanford making a comment or two if they maybe. Auburn definitely, Missouri definitely. So it's not like there's not other teams that won't, play that string, play that card with Babalola so that it's not really, it's not out there. So I don't think OU would. Why? I mean, just because like they wouldn't go after Sharon Moore like that. At least I don't think so. I think Brent has enough integrity to realize Sharon Moore's a Sooner. He knew Sharon. He coached when Sharon was here. So, and Bob has a lot of great things to say about Sharon Moore. So, but that's not changing the fact that the Michigan, there's a bill to come pay for this sign stealing scandal, and Sharon appears to be neck deep into it. So we'll see if that has anything to come out, because if you want to go play for Sharon Moore and you're not sure Sharon Moore is going to be there, and Bill has been a consistent presence, Brent's a consistent presence, and nothing weird is going on with Oklahoma, maybe you roll back to the guy you think can develop you the best and the environment you like the best, and it's also closer, and things maybe things start adding up for OU at crunch time. But we'll see. I'm certainly anticipating him choosing Michigan in the next 2 weeks, but we'll see if we get a decision date. And then once the decision date comes about, we usually start getting some better information about maybe where he's going. And we'll see if OU can pull an upset here. Christian Jones news. Colin Kennedy has an interview with him. That he just posted on 247. I'm not going to poach. Someone sent me the interview. I've seen the interview notes. I'm not going to poach that on this podcast. You want to read that interview? Go subscribe to 247. I can say it looks like OU and Nebraska, look like the schools, but in terms of the greater details, go read the interview and see what you think. Wouldn't shock me if another school or another visit happened before he makes a decision. So, like I said, good job, Colin Kennedy, getting that interview scoop. Christian Jones, like I said, we don't have a scheduled commitment date. Looks like OU's still definitely in play. Beyond that, Nebraska's still in play. Beyond that, don't have a real read don't have any information on my side from this. So he's still very much in play. And I think OU needs those two situations to resolve before they'll make any additional offers with the 2025 class. My sources are telling me OU has some flip candidates. They've got some players clearly identified. We just found out OU couldn't bring players on campus this weekend for the Temple game, unofficially or officially. And I would imagine OU's going to try and get through we'll probably see 2026 unofficial visits starting next week. And then we'll probably see the biggest activity for the night game for Tennessee. That just makes the most sense. But I think once we get a decision from Babalola and Jones, we'll get a better view of what's going on. I really think OU wants another edge rusher. Ideally, they could flip someone who's a top 200, top 150, or even just a high 3-star kid, twitchy, long wingspan kind of guy. They could find that. I think that's what they would like to add to the class. If they miss on Babalola, do they add another offensive tackle or offensive lineman? I'd like to think so. So we'll see maybe if they just want to get the Babalola news, I think, done, focus on him, and then see where they are in terms of maybe getting some other targets and some other offers out there. So to roll back to the Fasusi thing just quickly, there's some discussion as to, UT just got Jonah Williams. So from a certain UT perspective, they lost Michael Fasusi to OU, but they got Jonah Williams from OU, would be kind of the spin you could put on that, I guess. But to me, as good as Jonah Williams is, I think OU wins that recruiting war due to how much OU needs an infusion of talent and depth at the offensive tackle position. OU's safety position looks in really good shape. I mean, it's if Teddy Lehman is right about Michael Boganowski, if you've listened to the Gabe and Teddy podcast, and I'm going to say Teddy Lehman knows great safety play when he sees it, since he played for 2 years with the best safety in OU history in Roy Williams, who arguably in 2001 had the best season of an OU defensive player since, I would say, Brian Bosworth, since Bosworth's Butkus Award-winning season in the 80s. That's my guess. So if long story short, if Teddy Lehman is right about how good Boganowski is going to be, OU got their sort of potential elite dominating safety in this recruiting class. And then they got Reggie Powers as well, who just seems like he's in a similar ability. And they've got Jaden Hardy, who looks like he's going to be kind of a ball hawking, center fielder safety, more in the mold of maybe what Billy Bowman provides. So OU's got the safeties. They've already, at a minimum next year, there's a good chance Peyton Bowen and Robert Spears Jennings are your starting safeties. I mean, Billy Bowman obviously leaves. But OU's got 2 elite guys to plug in at safety again next year. And then all these freshmen will be sophomores. And, you've got Amarian Robinson, who, is close to a 5-star on Rivals, looks fantastic on film. And you've got Marcus Wimberly, who just, who looks like 200 pounds of flying around, covering, hitting safety. So OU's safety position is in much better shape overall than their offensive tackle position. If OU had 2 offensive tackles rated in the top 100 the way Billy Bowman and Peyton Bowen were, if we had a 5-star and a top 100 player at tackle right now, OU fans would be viewing the offensive line for this coming game against Temple for this season very differently. So, obviously, there's just so few guys Fasusi size, like Foji size, or even Babalola's size, that move like they do. To go back to the Gabe and Teddy podcast, I mean, Gabe compared Fasusi to Jamal Brown, who was a 2-time All-American and Outland Trophy winner at OU. And I believe Jamal had at least 2 or 3 Pro Bowl visits, had 2 or 3 NFL contracts. I use the example of, the Ole Miss offensive tackle who was drafted by the Texans and ended up with the Dolphins, whose name his name's escaping me. So I'm sure it'll come back to me in a second. But again, he's an All-Pro, highly paid guy. So that's Fasusi. And then if you listen to Gabe Eichert, showed Lane Johnson, Ryan Foji's film, and they were talking about how great Foji looks in his pass pro sets, and just, Foji needs different things than Fasusi, but between Bill and Jerry Schmidt, all the tools are there to make those guys elite offensive tackles. And to add 2 elite offensive tackles to OU's offensive tackle room is bigger than adding Jonah Williams to OU's safety room. It just is. It's a 9-point impact versus like a 7.5 impact. It's just I'm sure from Texas, Jonah Williams could be a fantastic safety for Texas, and if he's flying around for Texas for 3 years, we'll be regretting seeing him in burnt orange. But I think Texas fans will be just as angry seeing Michael Fasusi slamming their defensive ends into the ground and opening running holes for Sooner running backs. So that's my opinion on that issue. So obviously the 2 deep is out, and we've got got a lot of young players of impact in there. So obviously the first thing that leaps out is, Jaden Jackson and David Stone are two freshman defensive tackles, clearly in the two deep. Jaden Jackson is probably going to start. And David Stone, according to Coach Venables, who should know, had the best pass rushing stats of in their drills of any defensive tackle. So I think they're both going to have a huge impact this season. I think David Stone's impact might be third and long, where he's on the field a lot as a pass rushing specialist at defensive tackle, just to give OU even more pass rush push beyond what I think will be an improved defensive end room. If you have possibly, Grayson Holton and David Stone as your two pass rushing defensive tackles on third and long, just to get even more pressure up the middle, which, affects all quarterbacks. Obviously, I just talked about the safeties and Boganowski and Powers and Hayden. Michael Patterson McDonald's been hurt, so he's I think he's looking at a redshirt season. But the other three guys won't shock me if we see them on the field, especially Boganowski and Powers. So obviously, they're entering a group and have a chance to make a big impact. So that's a win-win for OU, especially from their evaluation and their recruiting staff, to choose those guys and push for those. Boganowski they pushed all year, and to quickly identify Reggie Powers and win that recruiting battle after Michigan State kind of imploded. At wide receiver, we wasn't on the two deep, and it's going to be hard for a wide receiver to get into the two deep. But we heard a lot about KJ Daniels from Brent Venables. Zion Kearney is probably going to round into shape where he's more of an impact player next year, but he's on the OR list. Zion Reagan is a little banged up, but I think in future depth charts we may see him show up and may see him on some special teams. So, just all of that, and Danny Okoye is also, on the third. He's like somewhere in the two deep, three deep at defensive end. And again, it wouldn't surprise me if we start seeing some, if Danny makes some noise. So obviously, we're seeing them, lots of players up and down the two deep. There's so many oars. It was almost like a three deep. It was almost like 55 players, not 44. So it was kind of strange that way. But they're all over the three deep. So it's the talent in this recruiting class, the talent of last year's class are definitely all over the roster. So OU made two new offers at defensive line. So the first one is a 2026 defensive tackle. His name's James Johnson. He's from Florida, from the Myers Beach area. He's previously listed at like 6'2", 260. He's now listed at 6'4", 280. His sophomore film it's very interesting. He's explosive. He's powerful. He's raw. He's probably playing a bit too high, but he is in the backfield all day, pushing guys around. So his junior film will be very, very interesting to watch, to see how much development he's made, how much progress he's made year over year. Definitely a name to track. If he's really improved year over year, technique-wise, and just bigger, stronger, that there's some potential there. There's definitely some tools there that get very interesting in terms of the 2026 class. The other name's kind of even sort of stranger. It's a 2027 defensive tackle offer, and Bates is starting to make some of those. They're out and about. Not too many of them. And his name's Jalen Brewster. He's from Cedar Hill in Texas. So last year he was about 6'2", 250, and he was a running back. All his highlights are at running back from his freshman year. Now, they're really good for a big man. He's agile. He's explosive. He's got good footwork. He's powerful. He rambles over people. He shows good speed for a guy that big. I mean, he is an absolute handful at running back, and he's lean. He's a lean 6'2", 250. Just looks like a giant running back, a little bit like he's not anywhere near as bulked up as this guy, but it's a little, if you remember, Auburn had a big running back that did well in the pros. called Brandon Jacobs. He also went to, I believe, Northern Illinois. He transferred to have to find some playing time. He's huge. He's 6'3", 255, or 6'2", 245, something like that. Big running back. So it looks a little bit like that. He's obviously not as muscled up as Brandon was in the pros, but he's not like a big kid. I mean, he looks lean. He looks in good shape. So according to his Twitter handle, his Twitter profile, he's now 6'4", in the 280 range and playing defensive line. So if you can imagine just all of those skills and athletic attributes move to defensive line. Now obviously this is going to be his sophomore film. He's probably going to look really raw and he'll probably look athletic. Is this a fit? This isn't the first time a running back's moved to a defensive tackle. We've seen it before. Big running backs have moved to defensive end or things along those lines. So this could certainly work out. He's got an OU offer. So Bates, obviously, someone on the OU staff got tipped off that this kid at running back is being moved to D-line because OU offered. It's like he doesn't have a lot of big-time offers yet. So OU perhaps got tipped off on this, that Cedar Hill's back at practice and they've moved this kid to D-line and maybe he looks incredible there. So definitely another story to track. But it's just interesting that Bates is adding to 26, starting to get some 27 kids offered and recruited. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on Huddle to see if I can see if Cedar Hill posts any early game footage of Jalen Brewster. But that's a name to just sort of file away for the future. It's an interesting. Again, he's a supremely athletic big man at running back. So does that mean he could be a defensive tackle? Todd Bates thinks so, and I'm not sure I'm willing to argue with Todd Bates. So I just mentioned there's no 2025 offers out there. Todd Bates has just recently followed a guy who's getting a lot of interest. His name is Joseph Mbachu. So his last name's capital M, Batchou. And he's 6'6", 290 pounds. He was born in Cameroon. So not Nigeria, but Cameroon. So born in Africa. He has offers from UT and UGA. I'm pretty sure this is the first year he's played American football. He's played basketball before. I think he moved this year. There's some basketball highlights from him. There's 2 games of highlights because his high school has played 2 games. He plays for a big-time program in Georgia. It's definitely a program that let me pull it up here and figure out where he's from. Here we go. He plays for Loganville, Georgia, Grayson High School. They're just loaded with players, just loaded. So the fact he's playing on that roster, I'm not sure he's starting, but he's definitely playing. I got clips of him from Grayson's already played 2 games, gets good competition. There's just a couple of highlights. All I can draw from that is he's huge. He's massive. He's playing nose guard in like a 3-man line look. He's athletic. He's obviously raw, but this is one of these things where you redshirt him and see where you are in 2 years. You may have an absolute gem of a big man. Again, to quote my co-host Caleb, there are only so many 6'6", 300-pound human beings that are athletic and agile and coordinated. They are in few and far supply. So grab as many of them as you can and let your strength and conditioning and your coaching staff develop them. So I could see an OU offer. UGA's offer. That's going to be tough to beat for a kid from Loganville. But UGA could be full. But if they pull off the double recruiting win of Elijah Griffin and Justice Terry, which I think is a strong possibility, they're just going to be loaded with guys. I don't know how they'll have room for Mbachu. So that could be a recruiting story to watch. It's a fascinating story, but just another highlights. It just highlights how international, high school football is becoming, and recruiting is becoming. NFL Academy, we'll probably have another batch of guys that will sign Division One letters of intent this year. They just played another American high school the other night. Their highlights are on YouTube. I haven't got around to watching them, but they're playing. So that whole system that OU used to get Daniel Eck and Kimmy's not going away. It's only getting more and more players added to it. So the season starts on Friday. So it's a Temple game, which I don't know. Temple obviously has brought in a lot of. I had the pleasure of being on a podcast with the Horns Down podcast, where we got to talk to a Temple writer, really good guy, providing good information. The Temples reset their rosters with a lot of JUCOs and a lot of transfer portal players. So it's, they were terrible last year and they're terrible the year before. Are they going to be terrible this year? Everyone's projecting that, but when you've got 45 new players on the roster, I guess they could be more competitive. So overall, on the Patreon site, I posted this a couple of weeks ago. So my schedule projection for OU this year is, and I make a couple of things I'm leveraging on this projection. Number one is that the OU defense is as good as advertised, especially in the secondary at safety. And cornerback gets the upgrade that Brent's talking about. Linebacker, I think, is going to be incredible with Kip Lewis and Danny Stutzman. So, and I think the front four is going to be significantly improved, especially at defensive end. So I think the Sooners are going to have a defense worthy of the accolades that people are sort of projecting for them. Then I think the offensive line gels and becomes a good unit. Good unit. Gives Jackson Arnold the time to hit all the weapons OU has. I think Bill Biedenbaugh and Seth Luttrell are going to leverage what the offensive line does well in the running game and really push that, be a little more focused on what the O-line is really good at, as opposed to what Lebby was doing last year, where he was just sort of running his scheme. And I think often, Gabe Eichert pointed out that the O-line just can't pull off some of the things they're being asked to do. So I think that will be a little more focused. Bill and Seth being just tied at the hip in terms of scheme and routes and running game and things along those lines. So I think both of those things, plus the abundance of weapons that Jackson Arnold will have, that allows OU to go 9-2 with losses at Ole Miss and LSU. Close losses on the road. Ole Miss having the best offense and their menagerie of mercenary D-line keep them in that game long enough, and Ole Miss's offense giving OU's defense perhaps the biggest test of the year. Then OU, goes to Baton Rouge, big home field advantage. LSU's offensive line allows them to also put up points on OU. I think Ole Miss and LSU are the two teams that have the complete package to do that. If Nussmeier is as good as they think he's going to be. But LSU defensively, the home crowd and the home crowd keeps LSU's defense just plays up, still gives up some points, but they play up. They play over their heads a little bit in Baton Rouge. And that's why OU loses those two games. OU holds serve at home, including beating Alabama and Tennessee. OU beats Missouri on the road. So I have them 9-2, depending upon the UT game. Now, maybe it's a cop-out completely, but I don't know how to predict that game. There's no rhyme nor reason to how that game plays out and who's going to win it. So I'm going to leave that open to you. I'm put it into a parking lot and come back to it maybe when I have a better feel. But it's such a crazy game to project. It doesn't always decide everything as much as we think it will. So I'm putting it in a parking lot. I don't know what to do with all the Texas hype, considering all that they lost, especially at linebacker and defensive line. So, and all their playmakers at wide receiver. So we'll see. They play Michigan. I'll have a better opinion after the Wolverines and the Longhorns tee it up in the Big House. So my freshman of influence for game one, and I think as the season goes on, they become bigger factors. The first one I think is Eddie Pierre-Louis. I've been told if Eddie Pierre-Louis had enrolled early, he probably has the starting guard job, one of the starting guard positions. I think as the season goes on, and after the first 3 games where he's able to get into the game and play, I think just like Caden Green last year, he becomes a bigger factor in terms of what OU does offensive line wise. And we see a slightly different offensive line with Eddie Pierre-Louis at one of the guard spots, allowing Sexton to play tackle. And that is that's the better lineup for OU, more talented lineup that ends up being the offensive line that helps OU win games down the stretch run. I think Jaden Jackson's getting, all the flowers right now, as he should. But I think David Stone, again, like Eddie Pierre-Louis, over these 3 non-conference games, David gets a lot of playing time, makes a lot of plays, and starts to become the pass rush factor on the defensive line on third down. Helps OU get off the field a number of times and, forces punts, pressures a quarterback, just makes the quarterback throw faster. Just everything he's always done that he did at IMG last year. And then I think we're going to see – I think Danny Okoye with these 3 games is also going to flash quite a bit. But depending upon how the rest of the defensive end group does in terms of pass rush, Danny Okoye is going to get some sacks and just look like a blur off the edge and find a way to get on the field and OU will kind of use him. We'll see some of the younger guys as OU needs more and more depth. We'll see Danny flash some a little bit during that time. Random other stuff in terms of predictions. I think the tight end room will make the biggest jump year over year. It's not exactly a bold prediction. I think Jacoby Johnson or another young cornerback gets on the field and makes plays. I think we see Eli Bowen subbing in for Kendall Dolby at Cheetah during some of these early games and flashes his playmaking ability. And you see why he's sort of that ultimate nickel corner, small cheetah kind of player for OU down the line in the future. In addition, I think, we're going to see I'm not sure how much has been talked about in the media, but when you look at OU's sort of, S&P rankings, the metrics, special teams is a huge negative for OU last year. I think overall, Doug Deacons, the analyst who can now coach full-time, is going to bring OU special teams to at least a 0 number, not a negative. And we're going to see some special teams plays, better special teams, better focused special teams. And to steal a line from Caleb, OU's got a lot of linebackers and safeties and tight ends, athletic players in that group, and cornerbacks that really form the bulk of your special teams players. So OU's coverage teams are really good. And I think we're going to see OU break some more returns from there. The kicking game, I put that in the same parking lot as Texas. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Obviously, they've now got 2 options at kicker, whereas last year all they had was Schmidt. So that should make a difference. So I'm also going to start doing some game recaps and stuff after Sooner games. It's not quite recruiting, but it's still in the wheelhouse of OU news. So we'll start adding that to the mix as well, starting this weekend. So I hope everyone, if you're traveling, hopefully you get to see OU on Friday. And if you're traveling around Labor Day weekend, please be safe. Enjoy this time with your family. And everyone, I appreciate you listening. So please make sure you subscribe to this podcast and don't forget to leave a rating. And finally, one more time, please visit patreon.com/Sooners360817 to subscribe for more recruiting content and to directly support this podcast, which keeps this podcast free. And I hope you guys are still enjoying the podcast. Thanks, everyone, and we will talk again after OU plays a football game.